Welcome to your educational news program on Chapter 9, Section 5, presented by SHOOD News.
Good afternoon, this is SHOOD News. My name is Julie Long.
And my name is Sylvia Aparicio.
And today we will be reporting on Chapter 9, Section 5.
Hello, for today's standards we will be covering the following. 11.1.4, examine the effects of the Civil War and Reconstruction and of the Industrial Revolution, including demographic shifts and the emergence in the late 19th century of the United States as a world power. 11.2.5, discuss corporate mergers that produce trusts and cartels and the economic and political policies of industrial leaders. 11.2.9, understand the effect of political programs and activities of the progressives. 11.5.4, analyze the passage of the 19th Amendment and the changing role of women in society. 11.6.5, trace the advances and retreats of organized labor from the Reconstruction of the American Federation of Labor and the Congress of Industrial Organizations to current issues of the post-industrial multinational economy, including the United Farm Workers in California. And last but not least, 11.10.7, analyze the women's rights movement from the era of Elizabeth Stanton and Susan Anthony and the passage of the 19th Amendment to the movement launched in the 1960s, including differing perspectives on the roles of women.
And now we will be turning the camera to Ms. Gail Albenta, who will be discussing on how Wilson won financial reforms.
Thank you, Julie. Like Roosevelt before him, President Woodrow Wilson regarded himself as the personal representative of the people. He believes that the president should be on the lookout for the general interests of the nation. President Wilson is developing a program of progressive reform and is leading the nation into building and advancing into a new world order. Just recently, Congress enacted two key antitrust measures, one of which is the Clayton Antitrust Act. This act banned monopoly within business organizations, and any violation of this law would lead to prosecution. It also legalized labor unions and farm organizations and would no longer be subjected to antitrust laws. Samuel Gompers, the president of the American Federation of Labor, or AFL, called the Clayton Act the Magna Carta for the labor and saw great rights to workers with it. The second key antitrust measure is the Federal Trade Commission Act, which helped set up the Federal Trade Commission, or the FTC. The FTC is kind of like a watchdog agency which was established to investigate and stop unfair business practices. A new tax system. Wilson wanted to limit the power of big business, and in order to do this he had to lower tariff rates. In 1913, the tariff rates were eventually reduced with the help of the Underwood Act. With the lower tariff rates, the federal government had to find another way to replace the earnings that the tariffs previously supplied. This resulted into ratifying the 16th Amendment, which legalized a graduated federal income tax. The federal income tax provided revenue by taxing individual earnings and corporate profits. By 1917, the government was receiving more money on this new income tax than they were with the tariffs. Next, financial reform. Trying to find a way to strengthen how the banks are run and a way to quickly adjust the amount of money in circulation. President Wilson's solution: create a private banking system under the federal control. The nation was divided into 12 districts, and a regional central bank was established within each of those districts. The Federal Reserve System was a national banking system that controls the U.S. money supply and availability of credit in the country. This system was one of Wilson's greatest accomplishments and probably also one of the greatest in U.S. history. This just in, breaking news from Carmen Perez.
And in breaking news tonight, I will be talking about women winning the right to vote. So even though Wilson was working very hard for reform of trust, tariffs, and banking, strong-willed women are not softening up on their right to vote. Some of their hard work was finally paid off because after 1910, women had the right to vote in only Wyoming, Utah, Colorado, Washington, and Idaho. Now that college-educated women are joining the suffrage movement, they are gaining more power. Members of the Boston group, which was founded by Radcliffe graduate Maud Wood Park, took trolley tours, and at each stop, the women would speak in public while crowds would gather around to see this unordinary sight. Two women, Lucy Burns and Alice Paul, founded the radical organizations such as the Congressional Union, and following it was the National Women's Party. And in 1917, it had gotten to the point that Alice Paul planned for her followers to hold a round-the-clock picket line around the White House.
Give them all the right to vote, right to vote. Please.
It has gotten to the point. And soon after, the 19th Amendment was finally passed by Congress in 1919, giving women the right to vote.
Yay! We got the right to vote! Yeah! Oh my gosh, stop.
This amendment won final ratification in August 1920, and this just so happened to be 72 years after women first began to fight for their right to vote.
Why, thank you, Carmen. So even though Wilson made political and economic reforms, he still disappointed the progressives who wanted a social reform. During Wilson's presidential campaign, he won the support of the NAACP's black intellectuals and white liberals by promising to them that he would make sure that blacks were treated equally and he would speak against lynching. During Wilson's presidency, Wilson picked white Southerners who favored and extended segregation. The African Americans and their liberal white supporters in the NAACP felt betrayed because Wilson went back on his word because he extended segregation. On November 12, 1914, the president's reception of an African American delegation brought the confirmation to a bitter climax. William Monroe Trotter, editor-in-chief of The Guardian, an African American Boston newspaper, led the delegation. Trotter complained that the African Americans from 38 states had asked the president to end segregation of the government employees, but since then, segregation had increased. Wilson found Trotter's tone infuriating. He did not like it at all. After Trotter shook his finger at the president to emphasize a point, the furious Wilson demanded that the delegation leave. Wilson's refusal to extend civil rights to the African Americans pointed to the limits of progressivism under his administration. So, in 1914, World War I in Europe came along. Europe needed America's help really bad. So, America kind of put the focus on progressivism on hold, and they focused on the war because Europe needed the help of the Americans.
Please hold while we fix technical difficulties.
World War I dominated most of Wilson's term as president, so that put an end to the progressive era. Now back to you, Sylvia.
So thank you for joining us again today. This is SHOOD News. Thank you and good night.